When I turned the key in Julian's front door on Christmas morning, my arms full of wrapped presents and homemade sweet potato pie, I expected the warmth of my son's embrace and the smell of Claire's cinnamon rolls. Instead, I stepped into a silence so profound it felt like death itself. The Christmas tree lights blinked in the empty living room, casting red and green shadows across the white walls. My boots echoed on the hardwood floor, the expensive Brazilian cherry wood I'd helped them afford when they'd renovated 2 years ago. Everything was pristine. Too pristine. The kind of clean that comes before a long absence, not the comfortable mess of a family preparing for Christmas dinner. Julian? My voice sounded small in the emptiness. Claire? Nothing. I set the presents down on the entryway table, my hands trembling slightly. The house felt wrong. Cold. Not just temperature cold, though the thermostat was turned down to 60 degrees, but something deeper. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you realize something terrible has happened. That's when I saw it. There, magneted to the refrigerator between a pizza coupon and a veterinary appointment reminder, was a yellow sticky note in Julian's hurried scrawl. Mom, something came up. We're in Jamaica for the week. Make yourself at home. Back Jan 2nd. Make yourself at home. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. But the words didn't change. Jamaica. A week. Jan 2nd. The sticky note was so casual, so thoughtless, like he was telling me he'd run to the grocery store, not that he'd abandoned me on Christmas Day. I, who had given them the $40,000 down payment on this very house, who had paid their property taxes for 2 years running, who had covered Claire's car insurance just last month when she claimed they were a little tight. I was not important enough for a phone call, not important enough for a real conversation, not even important enough for a text message longer than a grocery list. I stood there in the kitchen of the house I had purchased for them, holding that cheap yellow note as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, staring at the spotless granite countertops I had helped them choose. The red cashmere sweater I had bought for Julian hung uselessly in my suitcase, along with the silver cufflinks and the illusion of being part of the most important day of the year with my only child. I had spent $300 on gifts. For weeks, I had planned every detail. I had called my sister Eleanor in Atlanta to tell her I'd finally be spending Christmas with Julian after 3 years of excuses. 3 years of, we're going to Claire's parents this year, or we're keeping it small, just the 2 of us, or maybe next year, Mom. This year was supposed to be different. This year, Julian had called me in November and said, Mom, we want you here for Christmas. Please come. It's been too long. I had bought a new dress, a deep purple one, that Eleanor said brought out my eyes. I had practiced recipes, testing my sweet potato pie 3 times to get it perfect, because I remembered Julian saying once, years ago, that Claire loved sweet potato pie. I had even bought special ornaments. Delicate glass birds that I'd seen in a boutique window, thinking about how nice they'd look on their tree, how we could start a tradition of adding one each year. All of that collapsed in a second with those 4 casual words. Make yourself at home. I sank onto the leather sofa, the one I'd bought them last spring when Claire said their old one was embarrassing, and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. My arthritis made my fingers clumsy as I scrolled to Julian's number. I called. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. On the 3rd try, he finally answered, and I could hear tropical music and laughter in the background, the sound of glasses clinking, the unmistakable rhythm of people having the time of their lives. Mom, hey, you made it! His voice sounded rehearsed, too bright, like he'd been practicing what to say when I inevitably called. Listen, I'm sorry about the short notice. This trip was a last-minute thing. Claire's boss gave her a bonus, and the resort had a cancellation, and we needed this. You know, we've been so stressed with work and everything. Last minute? My voice came out barely above a whisper. Julian, I've been driving since 4 this morning. 6 hours in the snow. You couldn't have called me yesterday? This morning? Any time in the last. I know, and I'm really sorry, Mom, but you can still enjoy the house. Watch some movies, relax. There's food in the freezer. We'll celebrate when we get back, I promise. A late Christmas. It'll be great. But I knew it was a lie. because as he spoke, I walked to the kitchen counter, and there, next to a stack of unopened mail and a decorative bowl I'd given them last Easter, I saw the cruise itinerary, a thick packet of papers printed on expensive resort letterhead. I picked it up with numb fingers. December 3rd. The confirmation date was stamped right at the top, December 3rd, with both their names highlighted in yellow marker. Booking reference number. Cabin assignment. Excursion reservations for snorkeling. A sunset dinner cruise. A couple's massage. They had known for 3 weeks. 3 weeks while I bought gifts, planned meals, and counted down the days until I could hold my son again. 3 weeks while I drove 6 hours through snow and ice, my arthritic hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart full of nothing but love and anticipation. And they couldn't even bother to call. "I have to go, Mom. We're about to head to dinner. Love you." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in the silent kitchen, still holding the itinerary, and felt something inside me crack. Not break, not yet, but crack, like ice on a frozen lake when the temperature starts to rise. I don't know how long I sat on that sofa after the call ended. Time seemed to fold in on itself. The Christmas tree lights continued their cheerful blinking, red, green, gold, white, a mockery of celebration in the tomb-like silence. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of a neighborhood alive with holiday joy. Children laughing, car doors slamming as families arrived for dinner. The faint strains of Christmas music drifting from somewhere down the street. Inside Julian's house, there was nothing. Just me and the echo of my own breathing. The house felt like a mausoleum. A beautiful, expensive mausoleum that I had helped build, brick by brick, check by check, sacrifice by sacrifice. I looked around at the evidence of my love scattered throughout the room. The entertainment center I'd bought them when Julian mentioned they wanted to upgrade their setup, $1,200. The area rug beneath my feet, the one Claire had seen in a catalog and casually mentioned during a phone call, $800. The curtains, the coffee table, the lamp in the corner that cost more than I'd ever spent on lighting in my entire life. But it wasn't just the furniture. God, if it were just the furniture, maybe I could have laughed it off, chalked it up to being a generous mother. It was everything else. The years of everything else. I remembered the call 3 years ago, right after they'd found this house. Julian's voice had been tight with stress. "Mom, we found the perfect place, but we're $40,000 short on the down payment. The seller has another offer. If we don't move now, we'll lose it." I had gone to the bank that same day and withdrawn nearly my entire savings account. Money I'd been setting aside since Robert died, my safety net, my retirement cushion. I'd handed it over without hesitation because that's what mothers do. That's what I thought mothers did. "We'll pay you back, Mom," Julian had promised. "Once we're settled and Claire gets her promotion, we'll start sending you monthly payments." That was 3 years ago. I'd received exactly one payment of $500. 6 months after they moved in, accompanied by a text that said, "Sorry, it's not more. Things are tight right now." Things were always tight for them. Too tight to pay me back. Too tight to cover their property taxes, which I'd paid twice now, $6,000 each time, because Julian said they'd be ruined if the county put a lien on their house. Too tight to make their car payment last spring when Claire's Lexus needed new tires, so I'd covered 3 months at $480 each. Too tight to afford groceries during some vague emergency last summer, so I'd sent $600 for food. But apparently not too tight for Jamaica. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. 7-day all-inclusive Caribbean resort, Christmas week. The cheapest option I could find was $4,500 per person. Nearly $10,000 for the two of them. More if they'd upgraded to a better room, which I was certain they had. Claire didn't do basic anything. $10,000. While I sat in their empty house wearing a coat I'd owned for 6 years because I couldn't justify buying a new one. While I drove a 12-year-old Honda with a broken passenger window that I'd covered with plastic and duct tape because the $400 repair seemed too extravagant. While I bought generic groceries and skipped my book club's restaurant dinners because I was watching my budget. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. They could afford a luxury vacation, could plan it 3 weeks in advance, book excursions and couples massages and sunset cruises. but they couldn't afford a phone call. A simple, 10-minute phone call to tell me not to come, to save me a 6-hour drive through a snowstorm, to spare me the humiliation of arriving with my arms full of gifts to an empty house. Even a text would have cost nothing. "Hey Mom, change of plans, can we reschedule?" 15 seconds of typing. $0. But that would have required thinking of me as a person with feelings, with a schedule, with a heart that could break, and I was beginning to understand that Julian and Claire didn't see me that way at all. I was a resource. An ATM with a pulse. A problem solver, who appeared when summoned and disappeared when dismissed. I thought back to last Thanksgiving. I'd invited them to my house, had spent 2 days cooking all of Julian's favorites. They'd canceled the morning of, said Claire's parents had surprised them with plane tickets to Denver. "You understand, right, Mom? We can't say no to free tickets." I'd eaten turkey sandwiches for a week, alone in my small apartment, looking at the table set for 3. And the birthday before that, Julian's 35th, I'd driven down to take him to dinner, his choice of restaurant. He'd called an hour before I arrived to say they had last-minute plans with Claire's coworkers. "But you're already halfway here, so just come hang out for a bit." I'd sat in their living room for 45 minutes making awkward small talk while they got ready to leave, then drove 6 hours back home. There was always something more important, someone more special, some excuse wrapped in apologetic words that meant nothing. I looked down at the cruise itinerary still clutched in my hand. December 3rd. They'd known for 3 weeks, which meant they'd known when Julian called me 2 weeks ago to confirm I was coming for Christmas. When he'd said, "Claire's so excited to see you, Mom, she's planning a big dinner." When he'd asked what kind of wine I liked so he could pick up something nice. All lies. Lies told so easily, so casually, like I didn't deserve even the basic respect of honesty. The Christmas tree lights continued their relentless blinking, and somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed to life. I sat in the silence of my son's betrayal and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The crack I'd felt earlier widened, deepened, and through it, something new began to emerge. Not sadness anymore. Something colder, harder, clarity. I woke on December 26th to pale winter light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came crashing back. The empty house, the yellow sticky note, Julian's voice with tropical music in the background. I'd fallen asleep on the sofa sometime after midnight, still wearing yesterday's clothes, my neck stiff from the awkward angle. The house was freezing. They'd turned the thermostat down to 60 before they left, probably to save money on the heating bill for a house they wouldn't even be in. I pulled the throw blanket, another item I'd purchased, I realized bitterly, tighter around my shoulders, and stared at the ceiling. This was how I would spend Christmas. Alone in a cold house, surrounded by things I'd bought for people who couldn't be bothered to remember I existed. I forced myself up and went through the motions of a morning routine. I found coffee in the cupboard, the expensive organic kind that Claire insisted was the only type worth drinking, and made myself a cup. I opened the refrigerator looking for milk and found it completely empty, except for condiments and a bottle of white wine. They'd cleaned it out before leaving. Of course they had. Couldn't risk anything spoiling while they sipped rum punch on a beach somewhere. I drank my coffee black and sat at their kitchen table, the one I'd helped them pick out at that overpriced furniture store where Claire had champagne tastes and Julian had a mother with a checkbook. My hands wrapped around the warm mug, and I stared out the window at the neighbor's house, where I could see a family in matching pajamas opening presents in their living room. That should have been us. That was supposed to be us. But it wasn't. And as I sat there in the growing morning light, my grief began to calcify into something else, something harder, something that felt like ice forming over a deep, dark lake. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. Then I started typing. Every financial transaction I could remember. Every check I'd written, every wire transfer, every time I'd said yes when I should have said, "I can't afford that." Down payment on the house, $40,000. Property taxes, first time, $6,000. Property taxes, second time, $6,000. Claire's car payments, 3 months, $1,440. Emergency grocery money, $600. The furniture. I scrolled through my old bank statements, adding it up, piece by piece. The sofa, $2,200. The entertainment center, $1,200. The bedroom set when they said their old one was falling apart, $3,800. The area rug, $800. The dining table and chairs, $2,600. My fingers moved faster, remembering more. The kitchen appliances when they remodeled, the new washer and dryer because Claire refused to use the ancient ones that came with the house, the patio furniture for their backyard barbecues that I was never invited to, the lawnmower, the snowblower, the generator for power outages. Smaller things too, birthday gifts, anniversary presents, just because, surprises. The $500 I'd sent when Julian mentioned they wanted to take a weekend trip for their anniversary. The $300 for Claire's birthday spa day. The $200 for concert tickets. The $150 for new work clothes when Claire started her job. On and on and on. When I finally stopped typing, I stared at the total at the bottom of my screen, $73,340. $73,340. I felt physically sick. That was more than I currently had in my savings account. That was more than my car was worth. That was nearly 2 years of my Social Security income. I had given my son more money than some people made in a year, and he'd repaid me by leaving me alone on Christmas. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I couldn't sit still anymore. I paced through the house, really looking at it for the first time. Every room was a museum of my generosity and their indifference. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every upgrade had my fingerprints on it, my money, my sacrifice. And for what? So they could live in comfort while I scraped by? So they could take luxury vacations while I drove a car with a plastic-covered window? So they could treat me like an inconvenience, an afterthought, a resource to be tapped when needed and ignored when not? I walked to the guest bedroom where I'd put my suitcase and pulled out my old leather address book. I'd had it for 30 years. The pages soft and worn, filled with phone numbers in different ink colors from different eras of my life. I flipped through until I found the name I was looking for, Margaret Chen. Margaret and I had worked together for 15 years before we both retired. She'd gone on to get her real estate license, said she was too young to sit around doing nothing. We'd kept in touch, had lunch every few months, exchanged Christmas cards. She was also one of the sharpest people I knew, someone who didn't suffer fools and didn't mince words. It was early, not yet 8 o'clock, but Margaret had always been an early riser. I dialed her number and waited. Vivian? Her voice was surprised but warm. Merry Christmas. Well, day after. How was your holiday with Julian? Something in my throat tightened. I hadn't said it out loud yet. I hadn't put words to what had happened. Margaret, I need your help. I need to know about property law. There was a pause. What's going on? And then it all came spilling out. The empty house, the sticky note, the cruise itinerary, dated December 3rd. The years of financial support, the $73,000, the pattern of being used and dismissed. My voice stayed steady as I talked, almost clinical, like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. When I finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Vivian, whose name is on the deed to that house? Mine, I said. Julian wanted to build credit, so we agreed I'd hold the title for a few years and then transfer it once his financial situation stabilized. It made sense at the time. My credit score was better, and I was putting up the down payment anyway. So legally, you own the house they're living in? Yes. Another pause. And they've never paid you rent? Never made payments toward buying you out? No. It was supposed to be temporary. Just until... I stopped. Until what? Until they felt like acknowledging the debt? Until they decided I deserved to be paid back? Vivian. Margaret's voice was firm now, businesslike. I think you and I need to have a very serious conversation about your options. Are you at the house now? Yes. Stay there. I'm coming over. We need to talk about what you're going to do when they get back from Jamaica. What I was going to do. The words hung in the air, full of possibility and power. For 3 years, I'd been reactive, responsive, waiting for Julian to need something so I could provide it. Waiting for permission to be part of his life. I was done waiting. Margaret arrived 90 minutes later with a leather briefcase and 2 lattes from the coffee shop near her house. She took one look at me, still in yesterday's clothes, hair uncombed, eyes probably red from the crying I'd done somewhere around 3 in the morning, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "First things first," she said, handing me a latte. "You drink this, then we talk business." We sat at Julian's kitchen table, and Margaret pulled out a yellow legal pad and a copy of what looked like property records. I stopped by my office and pulled the deed information. "Vivian, this house is 100% in your name. Julian isn't even listed as a co-owner or a tenant with rights. Legally, this is your property. You can do whatever you want with it." "Whatever I want." The words felt strange in my mouth. "Whatever you want. You could sell it tomorrow. You could rent it out. You could move in yourself and tell them to find somewhere else to live." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes serious. "You could also give them notice to vacate. In this state, you need to give 30 days for a month-to-month tenancy, but since there's no written lease agreement and they're not paying rent, the situation is murky. With proper legal notice, you could have them out in 60 days, maybe less." I stared at the deed she'd placed in front of me. There was my name, Vivian Louise Patterson, in bold letters. Below it, the property address, the date of purchase, the legal description. Nowhere on the document did Julian's name appear. "They've been living here for 3 years, I said slowly. "Acting like it's theirs. Like they own it. Claire even told someone at a barbecue last summer that they'd bought this house." I heard her. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Did they? Did they buy it?" "No. I bought it. With my money." "Then it's yours." She clicked her pen. "Now let's talk about your options. But first, I need to know what you want, Vivian. Not what you think you should want. Not what would be nice or kind or what a good mother would do. What do you actually want?" I looked around the kitchen. At the expensive appliances I'd helped purchase. At the table where I'd never been invited for Sunday dinner. At the refrigerator that had held a sticky note instead of a phone call. "I want my money back," I said quietly. "I want them to understand what they've done. I want them to feel even a fraction of what I felt when I walked into this empty house on Christmas." Margaret nodded and started writing. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." For the next hour, she laid out a plan. First, secure all the financial ties. Then, establish legal boundaries. Finally, make my intentions clear in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. "Joint accounts," Margaret said. "Do you have any with Julian?" I nodded. "A savings account. We opened it years ago when he was in college, for emergencies. There's probably about $3,000 in it. My money, mostly, but I kept it open in case he needed something. Close it today. Transfer your portion to your personal account. If he asks, you can tell him you're reorganizing your finances." She made a note. "What about beneficiaries? Life insurance? Retirement accounts? Julian is the beneficiary on everything. He's my only child, so I just assumed, change it. Today. All of it." Margaret's voice was firm. "I'm not saying he should never inherit anything from you. But right now, while you're making decisions about your future, you need to make sure he can't benefit from treating you this way. Change the beneficiaries to your sister, a charity, anyone else. You can always change it back later if things improve." The thought made me feel guilty for half a second. Then I remembered the empty house. The guilt evaporated. "There's more," Margaret continued. "The house is in your name, which means you control access. I want you to consider changing the locks. Not to keep them out permanently, but to make a point. Install a smart lock system, one you can control from your phone. When they come back from Jamaica, they should understand immediately that things have changed." "That seems extreme," I said. But even as I spoke, I felt a small spark of something that might have been satisfaction. "Is it?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "They left you alone on Christmas without warning. They've taken tens of thousands of dollars from you. They're living in your house rent-free. What part of their behavior hasn't been extreme?" She was right. I'd been operating under normal rules, the rules of family, love, mutual respect. But Julian and Claire had been playing a different game entirely. "The bank opens at noon today, even on the day after Christmas," Margaret said. I checked. "Go there this afternoon. Close the joint account. Update your beneficiaries. While you're at it, check your credit report. Make sure Julian hasn't opened anything in your name." The suggestion horrified me. He wouldn't. Probably not. But people who feel entitled to tens of thousands of dollars sometimes feel entitled to other things too. Check anyway. I nodded, feeling shell-shocked but also strangely energized. For the first time since I'd arrived, I wasn't just reacting, I was acting. "Tomorrow we'll visit a locksmith I know," Margaret continued. "Professional, discreet, can install a smart system same day. You'll have complete control over who enters this house and when. You can unlock it remotely when they get back, or you can make them knock and ask permission. Your choice. Your choice." Those words kept appearing, and each time they did, I felt a little stronger. "What about legally?" I asked. "If I want them to move out eventually, what do I need to do?" Margaret pulled out another form. "You'll need to serve them with a notice to vacate. I can draft it for you. Make sure it's legally sound. Given the circumstances, I'd recommend 60 days. That gives them time to find a place but makes it clear you're serious." 60 days, I repeated. 2 months. In 2 months, I could reclaim my house, my investment, my self-respect. "But Vivian," Margaret's voice softened slightly, "you need to be sure. Once you start this process, there's no going back to the way things were. Your relationship with Julian will change. Maybe permanently." I thought about that. About the relationship we currently had, where I gave everything and received nothing but occasional phone calls and frequent requests for money. Where I was important enough to fund their lifestyle but not important enough to spend Christmas with. Where I was a resource, not a mother. "It's already changed," I said. "I just didn't want to see it." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then let's make sure you're protected." That afternoon, I walked into First National Bank with my shoulders straight and my mind clear. The banker, a young woman named Stephanie, pulled up my accounts and didn't even blink when I told her I wanted to close the joint savings account and remove Julian as beneficiary from my retirement accounts. "Reorganizing for the new year?" she asked pleasantly. "Something like that," I said. When I walked out 30 minutes later, I had a cashier's check for $3,247, the entire balance of the joint account, and confirmation that Julian's name had been removed from everything. My sister Eleanor was now the primary beneficiary on my life insurance. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund was listed as secondary. I sat in my car in the parking lot and stared at the paperwork. My hands should have been shaking. I should have felt guilty, anxious, afraid. Instead, I felt powerful. I pulled out my phone and searched for smart lock systems. By the time I drove back to Julian's house, no, my house, I'd ordered one with next-day delivery and scheduled an installation appointment. When they came home from Jamaica, they'd find more than a patient, forgiving mother waiting for them. They'd find locks that only I controlled. On the third day, I woke up and realized I was hungry. Not just physically hungry, though I'd been living on coffee and the granola bars I'd packed for the drive. I was hungry for something I couldn't quite name. Something I'd been denying myself for years while I waited for Julian's approval. Julian's time. Julian's love. I lay in the guest bed, the one I'd slept in for 2 nights now, since sleeping on the sofa had wrecked my back, and listened to the silence. But this morning, the silence felt different. Not oppressive, not like a mausoleum, just quiet, peaceful even. When was the last time I'd had peace? I got up and showered, taking my time. I used Claire's expensive shampoo, the kind that cost $30 a bottle at the salon. Why not? I dried my hair and actually styled it instead of just pulling it back. I put on the purple dress I'd bought for Christmas dinner, the one Eleanor said brought out my eyes. It still looked good. I still looked good. In the kitchen, I made a proper breakfast. Not just coffee. I found eggs in the freezer, bread in the pantry, butter in the door of the refrigerator where it had somehow survived their purge. I made myself French toast the way Robert used to make it, with cinnamon and vanilla, and I sat at the table and ate it while reading the news on my phone. It was a small thing. A normal thing. But I realized I hadn't done anything this simple and self-nurturing in months. Maybe years. I was always rushing, always worried about the next call from Julian, always saving money in case he needed something. After breakfast, I made a decision. I got dressed properly. Nice slacks, a soft sweater, my good coat, and drove to the grocery store. The supermarket was busy with post-Christmas shoppers hunting for deals. I took a cart and walked slowly through the aisles, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't look at prices. I didn't buy the generic brand. I didn't calculate whether I could afford it. I bought lamb chops, the good ones from the butcher counter, fresh rosemary and thyme, baby potatoes, the small golden ones that cost twice as much as regular potatoes, asparagus, even though it was expensive this time of year, a bottle of red wine that the store clerk recommended, something French with a label I couldn't pronounce, fresh bread from the bakery, real butter, a chocolate torte from the dessert case that looked almost too beautiful to eat. At the checkout, the total came to $87.42. A year ago, I would have been horrified. That was a week's worth of groceries for me, normally. But today, I handed over my credit card without flinching. This was for me. I deserved this. Back at the house, I unpacked the groceries like I was preparing for something sacred. I found an apron in one of the drawers, another thing I'd bought for Claire, who I'd never actually seen cook, and tied it around my waist. I turned on the stereo system, the expensive one I'd purchased when Julian said they needed better sound quality, and scrolled until I found a jazz station. Miles Davis poured into the kitchen, that smooth, aching trumpet that always reminded me of Robert. We used to listen to jazz on Sunday mornings, dancing in our tiny kitchen while breakfast burned on the stove. I hadn't listened to it much after he died. It hurt too much. But today, it didn't hurt. It felt like coming home. I cooked the way I used to cook when it was just for pleasure, not obligation. I seared the lamb chops in a cast-iron skillet until they had a perfect crust, then finished them in the oven with fresh rosemary. I roasted the baby potatoes with olive oil and sea salt until they were golden and crispy. I steamed the asparagus just until tender and dressed it with lemon and butter. I set the dining table, the one I'd bought for Julian and Claire's dinner parties that I was never invited to, with care, one place setting. Claire's good china, the set she'd registered for and I'd bought as a wedding gift. A cloth napkin, the crystal wine glass. I lit 2 candles in the silver candlesticks I'd given them last anniversary. When everything was ready, I plated the food like I was in a restaurant. I poured the wine. I sat down at the head of the table, looked at the beautiful meal I'd created for myself, and felt tears prick my eyes. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. The lamb was perfect, tender, and flavorful. The potatoes were crispy on the outside and fluffy inside. The wine was rich and smooth, with notes of cherry and oak. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, and for the first time in 3 years, maybe longer, I didn't worry about whether someone else was happy. I didn't wonder if I'd done enough, given enough, been enough. I was enough. This moment was enough. After dinner, I cleaned the kitchen, washing the dishes by hand instead of using the dishwasher, taking my time. Then I poured another glass of wine, cut myself a slice of the chocolate torte, and called Eleanor. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, her voice warm and knowing. "Julian called me yesterday, asking if I'd heard from you. Said you weren't answering his messages. I've been busy." "Good." I could hear the smile in her voice. "Busy with what?" "Living," I said. "I just cooked myself the best meal I've had in years." "Tell me everything." I did. The empty house, the sticky note, the $73,000, Margaret's visit, the closed bank accounts, the smart locks being installed tomorrow. I told her about the lamb chops and the wine and the jazz music, and how I'd used Claire's expensive shampoo without permission. Eleanor listened without interrupting, making small sounds of encouragement and occasional sharp intakes of breath when the story got particularly painful. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know what this is, don't you?" she finally said. A betrayal? A gift. Her voice was fierce. That familiar Eleanor intensity that had gotten her through 2 divorces and a cancer scare and raising 3 kids on a teacher's salary. Vivian, you've been trying to buy Julian's love since Robert died. Trying to be both parents, trying to make sure he never felt the loss. But honey, he's not a child anymore. He's a grown man who's been taking advantage of your grief and your guilt for years. The words hit hard because they were true. I'd been so afraid of Julian feeling abandoned after his father died that I'd let him abandon me, over and over again. This, what happened on Christmas, this is your freedom, Eleanor continued. He showed you exactly who he is. Someone who takes and gives nothing back. Now you get to decide who you want to be. Do you want to be the mother who keeps paying for scraps of attention? Or do you want to be Vivian, the woman who deserves better? I looked around the dining room. The candles were still flickering, casting warm shadows on the walls. My wine glass sat empty next to the plate with chocolate crumbs. The jazz was still playing, some blues number that made my chest ache, in a good way. I want to be Vivian, I said. Then be her, Eleanor said simply. And Vivian, welcome back. I've missed you. We talked for another hour, about everything and nothing. Her grandkids, her new book club, the trip to New Orleans she was planning for spring. She invited me to come with her. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. After we hung up, I moved to the living room with the rest of the chocolate torte and the novel I'd been trying to read for 6 months. It was a thick historical fiction, the kind I used to devour before my life became consumed with worrying about Julian. I'd started it 3 times but could never focus, always distracted by my phone, waiting for his calls or worrying about his next crisis. Tonight, I turned my phone on silent and read. I read for 3 hours, lost in someone else's story, and felt pieces of myself clicking back into place, pieces I'd forgotten existed, the part of me that loved books, the part that enjoyed good food and wine, the part that could sit in silence without feeling lonely. I wasn't just Julian's mother. I wasn't just a wallet with a heartbeat, a problem solver on speed dial, a bank account waiting to be tapped. I was Vivian Louise Patterson, 70 years old, widow, lover of jazz and good books and lamb chops cooked to perfection. A woman who deserved to be treated with basic human decency. And I was done apologizing for that. The locksmith came on the 4th day, a efficient young man named Marcus who didn't ask questions when I told him I wanted a smart lock system installed on all exterior doors. He had the whole house done in 3 hours, front door, back door, garage entrance. When he left, I sat on the sofa with my phone, opening and closing the locks remotely, watching the bolts slide into place with a satisfying click. Control. I had control now. That afternoon, I started going through the house room by room, looking for pieces of myself that I'd left behind over the years. I was surprised by how much there was. In the guest bedroom closet, I found 3 boxes of photographs from when Julian was young. Pictures of Robert holding newborn Julian at the hospital. Julian's first birthday, his face covered in chocolate cake. His high school graduation. Our family vacations to the beach, when we could barely afford the gas money but went anyway because Julian had begged. I packed them carefully in my suitcase. These memories were mine, not theirs. In the basement, I found the quilt my mother had made, the one I'd lent to Julian when he first moved in, because he said the house felt cold. It was stuffed in a storage bin beneath old ski equipment they'd bought and used once. I pulled it out, shook off the dust, and folded it with reverent hands. My mother had spent 2 years on this quilt, every stitch a prayer. It didn't belong in a basement. There were books on the shelves. My books, first editions and signed copies I'd collected over a lifetime. I'd brought them over to fill out Julian's library, to make the house look lived in and cultured. I took them now, each one, running my fingers over the familiar spines. Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou. These voices had sustained me through grief and loneliness. I wouldn't leave them behind. In the kitchen, I found my grandmother's cast-iron skillet, the one I'd seasoned for 40 years, hanging on a rack with Claire's all-clad cookware. I took it down and wrapped it in a dish towel. In the dining room hutch, I discovered the silver serving pieces from my wedding, tarnished now from neglect. I packed those too. With each item I reclaimed, I felt lighter. These weren't just things, they were pieces of my history, my identity, my life, before I'd made Julian the center of my universe. I was taking myself back, one photograph and one cast iron skillet at a time. By evening, my car was full. I'd have to make a second trip to get everything back to my apartment, but I didn't care. What mattered was that nothing I valued would remain in this house when I was done with it. I called Margaret that night. "I want to sell it," I said without preamble. "The house. I want it sold." "You're sure?" Her voice was careful. "That's a big step, Vivian. I've never been more sure of anything." I looked around at the expensive furniture, the designer curtains, the renovated kitchen. None of it meant anything without love. It was just stuff. Pretty, expensive stuff that had cost me my dignity. How long would it take? In this market? With a house this nice in this neighborhood? I could have it listed by the end of next week and probably under contract within a month. Maybe less. I heard papers rustling. But Vivian, Julian, and Claire are living here. They'd need to be gone first or at least notified. You can sell a house with tenants, but it's more complicated. They're getting notified. My voice was steel. I'm giving them 60 days to vacate. Then I want it sold immediately. My voice was steel. I want it sold immediately. Okay. Margaret's tone shifted into business mode. I'll draft the notice to vacate. You'll need to serve it to them formally when they return. After that, we can start preparing the house for market. Professional photos, staging if needed, though honestly the place is already furnished beautifully. Of course it was. I'd furnished it. There's one more thing, I said. I want to write them a letter. Not the legal notice, that's your department, but something I can give them when they get back. Something that explains why. Do you think they'll listen? I don't know, but I need to say it. For me, not for them. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen. I drafted emails and texts to Julian 1,000 times over the years, carefully worded messages designed not to upset him, not to seem needy, not to make him feel guilty. I deleted most of them before sending. This letter, I would send. I started writing. Julian, when I arrived at this house on Christmas morning, I expected to find family. Instead, I found a yellow sticky note telling me you'd left for Jamaica. I've spent the last week thinking about that note, about what it represents. Not just the vacation you took without telling me, but years of a pattern I chose not to see. I've calculated what I've given you financially over the past 3 years. The total is $73,340. The down payment on this house. The property taxes, paid twice. The car payments, the furniture, the appliances, the emergency money. I kept a list because I needed to see it written down to believe it myself. But the money isn't really the point, is it? The point is that I gave and gave and gave, thinking that if I just gave enough, you'd want to spend time with me. You'd invite me to Sunday dinners. You'd call on ordinary Wednesdays just to talk. You'd remember I exist on Christmas. I was wrong. Generosity without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. And I've enabled you to treat me like an ATM instead of a mother. This house is in my name. Legally, it belongs to me. I've decided to exercise my rights as the owner. You have 60 days from the date you receive the formal notice to vacate the property. After that, the house will be sold. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this to save myself. I'm 70 years old, Julian. I don't have another decade to waste waiting for you to see me as a person who deserves respect and consideration. You're my son, and I'll always love you. But I will no longer accept being treated as if my only value is financial. I will no longer rearrange my life around your needs while you can't be bothered to send a text message before leaving town. I deserve better, and for the first time in years, I'm choosing to believe that. I hope someday you understand. But even if you don't, I'll be okay. Mom. I read it over 3 times, making small edits, ensuring every word was true and clear. No accusations. I couldn't back up. No emotional manipulation, just facts and boundaries. I folded the letter, and put it in an envelope. Then I drafted a second letter, this one shorter. Claire, the house you've been living in belongs to me. Julian may not have told you that. I'm telling you now. You have 60 days to find other accommodations. A formal legal notice will follow. I wish you well. Vivian. 2 letters. One for my son, full of the painful truth. One for my daughter-in-law, who'd never pretended to care anyway. I placed them both on the kitchen counter where the sticky note had been, weighted down with a coffee mug. When Julian and Claire came home, these would be the first things they saw. Margaret came by the next morning to review the letters and the formal notice to vacate. She read them carefully, her face unreadable. "These are perfect," she finally said. "Clear, factual, firm. No room for argument." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted. "But also free." "Good. Fear means you're doing something that matters. And Vivian, I'm proud of you." We spent the next hour going over the timeline. Julian and Claire would return on January 2nd. I'd be there waiting, with the letters and the formal notice. They'd have until March 3rd to move out. Margaret would list the house on March 4th. Based on comparable sales in the neighborhood, we estimated it would sell for around $380,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage and Margaret's commission, I'd walk away with approximately $290,000. My money, my freedom, my future. "What will you do with it?" Margaret asked. I thought about that. About the chocolate torte and the lamb chops and the novel I'd finished last night, about Eleanor's invitation to New Orleans, about the life I'd been putting on hold. "Live," I said simply. "I'm going to live." I heard their car pull into the driveway at 3:47 p.m. on January 2nd. I'd been sitting in the living room for an hour, waiting, my packed suitcases by the door. The 2 letters and the formal notice to vacate sat on the kitchen counter in plain white envelopes, arranged in a neat row. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected to be shaking, nervous, second-guessing everything. Instead, I felt calm, cold, almost. Like I was watching myself from a distance. The front door opened, or tried to. I heard Julian's key turn. Then his confused grunt when the lock didn't respond. "That's weird," I heard him say. "Claire, is your key working? Let me try." A pause. "No." "What the hell?" I walked to the door and opened it myself. They stood on the porch, tanned to a deep bronze, looking relaxed and healthy. Julian wore a new linen shirt I'd never seen before. Claire had her hair in braids with beads on the ends, the kind you get on vacation. Their suitcases were expensive looking, probably new. "Mom." Julian's face broke into a surprised smile. "You're still here. I thought you would have gone home by now." "Still here." As if I were the one who'd overstayed my welcome. "The locks have been changed," I said evenly. "I'll let you in." I stepped aside, holding the door open. They exchanged a glance, the first hint that something was off, but wheeled their suitcases inside anyway. "Changed the locks?" Claire's voice had that edge it got when she was annoyed. "Why would you do that?" "Why would you do that?" "Security reasons," I said. I closed the door behind them and walked back to the living room, sitting in the armchair I'd purchased last year. Not the sofa. The armchair had better posture, better positioning. I could see them both without turning my head. Julian laughed, that nervous sound he made when he didn't know what else to do. "Mom, you scared us. We thought something was wrong." He moved toward me, arms outstretched for a hug. I didn't stand up. He stopped mid-step, arms still extended awkwardly. "Mom, if you're gripped by my story so far, don't let the adventure end. Hit the like button now, share, subscribe, and let's get my story to 1,000,000 views together." "How was Jamaica?" I asked. My voice was pleasant, neutral, the tone you'd use with an acquaintance at the grocery store. It was. It was amazing. He lowered his arms slowly. "Look, Mom, I know you're upset about Christmas, but let me explain." "I'm not upset," I said. It was true. Upset was too small a word for what I'd felt, what I'd transcended. "I'm just asking about your vacation." "Was the resort nice?" Claire dropped her purse on the sofa with a theatrical sigh. "Vivian, If you're going to be passive-aggressive about this, just say so." We apologized. It was a last-minute thing. "These opportunities don't come around often." "December 3rd, I said calmly. "That's when you booked it, 3 weeks before Christmas. I saw the itinerary." The silence that followed was exquisite. Julian's tan seemed to fade slightly. You went through our papers?" "I was here for a week, in the house I own. Yes, I saw things." I folded my hands in my lap, "but I'm not interested in arguing about it. I'm just stating facts." "You booked the trip 3 weeks in advance. You chose not to tell me. Those are simply facts." "Mom, listen." Julian ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when he was caught doing something wrong. "We were going to tell you, but we knew you'd be disappointed, and we didn't want to ruin your Christmas, so we thought." "You thought a sticky note on the refrigerator would be better than a phone call?" I kept my voice level. "You thought arriving to an empty house would ruin my Christmas less than honesty?" Claire made an exasperated sound. "We brought you something." She dug through her carry-on bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "Here, a peace offering. It's a handmade bracelet from a local artisan, very authentic." She held it out to me. I didn't reach for it. "I don't want it," I said. "Mom, come on." Julian's voice took on that wheedling quality, the one he used when he wanted something. "Don't be like this. We said we're sorry. Look, we took some amazing photos. You want to see? There was this sunset cruise, and the water was so blue, and—" "No." I stood up. "I don't want to see your photos. I don't want your bracelet. I don't want your excuses." I walked to the entryway and picked up my coat from the hook. "I'm leaving now." "Leaving?" Julian followed me. "But you just got here. I mean, you've been here a week. Don't you want to stay for dinner? We can order something. Catch up." "There are 2 letters on the kitchen counter," I said, pulling on my coat with careful, deliberate movements. "One for each of you. There's also a formal legal notice. I suggest you read all 3 carefully." Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding the envelopes. Her face had gone pale beneath her tan. "Legal notice? Vivian, what is this?" "It's self-explanatory." I picked up my purse. "You have 60 days. 60 days for what?" Julian's voice was rising now, panic creeping in. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I looked at him then, really looked at him, my son, my only child. The baby I'd rocked through colic, the toddler whose hand I'd held on his first day of school, the teenager I'd sat up worrying about when he missed curfew, the man who'd left me alone on Christmas without a second thought. "Read the letters," I said quietly. "Everything you need to know is there." "Mom, wait." He grabbed my arm and I looked down at his hand until he released it. "You can't just leave like this. Talk to us. Tell us what's going on." "I tried to talk to you on Christmas," I said, "but you were on a beach in Jamaica." I picked up the handle of my suitcase. Behind me, I heard paper tearing, Claire ripping open her envelope, then a sharp intake of breath. "She's kicking us out," Claire said, her voice flat with shock. "She's selling the house." "What?" Julian snatched the letter from her hands, his eyes scanning frantically. "Mom, you can't. This is our home." "No," I said, opening the front door. The January cold rushed in, sharp and clarifying. "It's my house. It's always been my house. You just forgot that." "Mom, please," Julian's voice cracked. "We can talk about this. We can work something out. Don't do this. I'm your son." I turned in the doorway and looked at him one last time. "Yes, you are. And I'm your mother, not your bank account, not your backup plan, not your afterthought." I pulled my suitcase over the threshold. 60 days, Julian. The lawyers will be in touch." "You're being ridiculous." Claire's voice was shrill now, angry. "Over one missed Christmas? You're going to destroy your relationship with your son over one mistake?" I paused, turned back. "It wasn't one Christmas, Claire. It was 3 years of Christmases I spent alone. 3 years of Thanksgivings I celebrated by myself. 3 years of phone calls that went unreturned and invitations that were declined. It was $73,000 given and never acknowledged. It was 1,000 small cruelties that I accepted because I was afraid of losing him completely." I looked at Julian. "But I lost you anyway, didn't I? I just didn't want to see it." "Mom, His voice broke. There were tears in his eyes now. I love you. You know I love you. Maybe you do, I said softly, but you don't respect me. And I finally realized that love without respect isn't enough. I walked to my car, loaded my suitcase in the trunk, and slid behind the wheel. Through the window, I could see them standing in the doorway. Julian with the letter clutched in his hand, Claire with her arms crossed, both of them looking shocked and lost. I started the engine, put the car in reverse, and drove away. I didn't look back. I made it 3 blocks before my phone started ringing. Julian's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Voicemail. Again. I pulled over into a coffee shop parking lot and turned off the ringer. Within seconds, text messages started flooding in. Mom, please come back. We need to talk about this. You're overreacting. This is insane. I stared at that last one. Insane. There it was. The word he always used when he wanted to dismiss my feelings, make me doubt myself. I put the phone in my purse and sat there, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. I'd known this would be hard. I'd prepared for it. But I hadn't prepared for the way my heart would lurch when I saw his tears, the way my resolve would waver when he said he loved me. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. Mrs. Patterson? A tentative voice. This is Claire's mother, Diane. Claire just called me very upset. She said you're evicting them? Surely there's been some misunderstanding. I closed my eyes. Of course they'd call in reinforcements. There's no misunderstanding. The house is in my name. And I've asked them to vacate in 60 days. But over a missed Christmas? That seems extreme, don't you think? With all due respect, Diane, this is between me and my son. Claire says you gave them the house as a gift. I didn't give them anything, I said, my voice hardening. I put down the down payment with the understanding it was temporary. The deed has always been in my name. They've never paid me rent, never paid me back, never even acknowledged it as a loan. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, I didn't know that. No, I said. I imagine there's a lot you don't know. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Julian. I turned it off completely. I needed to go home, back to my own apartment, but something held me there in that parking lot, some sense that this wasn't finished yet, that the real confrontation was still coming. I was right. 20 minutes later, Julian's car pulled into the parking lot. He must have driven around looking for me, spotted my car. He parked directly behind me, blocking me in, and got out. Claire emerged from the passenger side, her face tight with anger. I took a deep breath and got out to meet them. Mom, thank God. Julian walked toward me quickly. You can't just turn off your phone. We need to talk about this like adults. I am talking like an adult, I said calmly. I gave you written notice. I explained my reasons. There's nothing left to discuss. Nothing left to... He laughed, that sharp, disbelieving sound. You're trying to make us homeless over a vacation. Do you hear how crazy that sounds? I'm not making you homeless. I'm giving you 60 days to find new accommodations. That's more than generous. Claire stepped forward, her arms crossed. This is about money, isn't it? You're upset about the money you gave us. Fine. We'll pay you back. When? I asked simply. You've had 3 years to pay me back. You've never sent a single payment, except that one time. We've been struggling. Julian's voice rose. You know we've been struggling. Claire's student loans, my career transition, the cost of living. The cost of a $10,000 vacation to Jamaica? I kept my voice level. You struggled enough to afford that? That was different, Claire snapped. That was a bonus, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I was a once-in-a-lifetime mother, I said quietly. But you treated me like I'd be around forever, like I'd always be there to bail you out, like my time and my feelings and my money were infinite resources you could tap whenever convenient. Julian's face was cycling through emotions, confusion, anger, something that might have been shame. You're my mother. You're supposed to help me. That's what parents do. Help, yes. Enable, no. I met his eyes. I've helped you for 3 years, Julian. I gave you the down payment on a house. I paid your property taxes. I covered your car payments. I sent money every time you called with an emergency. And what did I get in return? We're grateful. A sticky note on a refrigerator. I continued, my voice growing stronger. That's what I got. I drove 6 hours through a snowstorm on Christmas morning, and you couldn't even be bothered to call and tell me not to come. We were going to call. Julian's hands were in fists at his sides. We knew you'd be upset. And we didn't want to deal with it before the trip. And then we were on the plane. And you didn't want to deal with it, I repeated. With me, you didn't want to deal with me. That's not what I meant. But it's what you said. I looked at Claire. Both of you. I'm something to be dealt with, a problem to be managed, a guilt trip to be avoided. Claire's jaw tightened. You know what? You want honesty? Fine. You're exhausting, Vivian. You're always so needy, always wanting attention, always expecting us to drop everything for you. I expected you to remember I existed on Christmas. And we forgot. People forget things. We're human. But instead of being understanding, you're destroying our lives over it. Claire's composure was cracking. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost us? Moving expenses, security deposits, first and last month's rent? We don't have that kind of money lying around. But you had $10,000 for Jamaica. That was a bonus. I told you. You told me a lot of things that weren't true. I turned to Julian. You both did. You told me the trip was last minute when you'd booked it 3 weeks earlier. You told me you'd pay me back when you never intended to. You told me I was important to you when your actions proved otherwise. Julian's face had gone pale beneath his tan. Mom, please. This is our home. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, Julian. Where did you think I was supposed to go on Christmas? It's not the same thing. You're right. It's not. Because I gave you 60 days' notice and legal documentation. You gave me a sticky note. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Then his expression shifted, hardening into something ugly. This is about Dad, isn't it? You've been doing this guilt trip thing since he died, trying to make me replace him, trying to make me responsible for your happiness. The words hit like a slap. I actually took a step back. That's not fair, I said quietly. Isn't it? Julian was warming to the theme now, his voice gaining confidence. You've been smothering me for 3 years. Calling all the time, wanting to visit, throwing money at us like that would make us love you more. It's manipulative, Mom, and honestly, it's pathetic. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Claire looked shocked, like Julian had gone too far. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time. Not the boy I'd raised, not the man I'd hoped he'd become, but the person he actually was. Someone who would take everything I offered and then blame me for offering it. I came home on Christmas to an empty house, I said softly, and in that silence I realized I'd been giving all my love to a relationship that was only transactional. Mom, you take my money, but you don't take my calls. You accept my help, but you don't give me your time. You let me buy you furniture and pay your bills, but you can't make space for me at your table. My voice was steady now, calm. That's not a relationship, Julian. That's a transaction. And I'm closing the account. So that's it? His voice cracked. You're choosing money over your own son? No, I said. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in 3 years, I'm choosing myself. I walked to my car door. Julian moved to block me. Move your car, Julian. Not until you listen to reason. I've listened to you for 3 years. Now you can listen to my lawyers. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret's number. She answered on the first ring. Margaret, I'm at the Coffee Bean on Maple Street. Julian has blocked my car in and is refusing to let me leave. I need you to document this for the eviction case. Julian's eyes widened. You're calling a lawyer? On your own son? Move your car, or I call the police next. He stood there for another moment, breathing hard, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Then Claire touched his arm. Come on, she said quietly, all her earlier bravado gone. Let's go. They walked to their car. Julian sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. Through the windshield, I could see him crying. Part of me wanted to go to him, the mother part. the part that had kissed his scraped knees and dried his childhood tears. But I stayed where I was. He backed up and drove away. I stood in the parking lot until Margaret arrived 10 minutes later. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. "You did it," she said. "The hard part is over." But we both knew that wasn't true. The hard part was just beginning, learning to live with the choice I'd made, to be the mother who set boundaries instead of the mother who sacrificed everything. Still, as I drove home to my own apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The text started that night and didn't stop for days. "Mom, please. Can we just talk? You're throwing away our whole relationship over this. Claire is crying. Are you happy now? I can't believe you're doing this to us." "Fine. Be that way. We don't need you anyway." That last one came at 2 a.m. I read it in the darkness of my bedroom, the blue light from my phone illuminating the familiar cracks in the ceiling of my apartment. The apartment I'd lived in for 8 years, the one I'd stayed in instead of moving somewhere nicer because I was always saving money. For Julian, for emergencies. For the next crisis that would require me to open my checkbook. I typed out a response. "All communication needs to go through my attorney, Margaret Chen." I included her email and phone number. Then I blocked Julian's number. It felt like cutting off a limb. But sometimes you have to amputate to save the rest of the body. The next morning, Margaret called. "They've been emailing me. Julian wants to negotiate. He's offering to pay rent." "How much?" $800 a month. I laughed, a sound without humor. "The mortgage on that house is $2,200 a month. Property taxes are another $500 monthly. He's offering to pay a third of the actual cost." I told him it wasn't acceptable. He said it was all they could afford. Margaret paused. "He also said, if you go through with this, you'll never see him again." He wanted me to tell you that. The threat hung in the air, the ultimate weapon, the thing he knew would hurt most. "Then I won't see him again," I said quietly. "Tell him the eviction stands." Over the next few weeks, the messages continued through other channels. Claire's mother called twice more. Julian's college roommate sent a Facebook message saying I was breaking his heart. Someone from their church, a church I'd never been invited to attend, emailed, asking me to reconsider for the sake of Christian forgiveness. I responded to none of them. Margaret handled everything with crisp, professional emails. The 60-day clock was ticking. On February 15th, Margaret called with news. "They're out. Left yesterday, actually. 11 days early." I sat down heavily on my sofa. "They're gone?" "Gone. I drove by this morning to check. The house is empty. They left the keys in the mailbox with a note that said, 'Here's your precious house back.'" I should have felt triumph, victory. Instead, I felt hollow. "Did they damage anything?" "Not that I could see." "Took all the furniture, even the stuff you bought. Walls are bare. Place is completely empty except for dirt and some scratches on the hardwood. Nothing that won't buff out. The furniture I'd purchased, now gone to wherever Julian and Claire had landed. I supposed I should care. But I didn't. Let them have it. Let them sit on those expensive sofas and remember who paid for them. "I'll put it on the market tomorrow," Margaret said gently. "Are you ready?" Was I? Ready to sell the last tangible connection to my son, the house I'd bought with dreams of future grandchildren playing in the yard, of Sunday dinners and holidays? "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The house sold in 8 days. A young couple with a toddler, the wife pregnant with their second. They offered full asking price and could close in 30 days. When Margaret called with the news, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee, and I started crying. Not sad tears. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. "Vivian?" Margaret's voice was concerned. "Are you okay?" "I'm free," I said through the tears. "Margaret, I'm finally free." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and looked around my small apartment. 1 bedroom, a bathroom with a leaking faucet I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, a living room barely big enough for a sofa and a TV. I'd lived here in this cramped space while Julian and Claire spread out in a 4-bedroom house with a yard. Why had I done that? Because I was saving money. Always saving money. For the next emergency, for Julian's next crisis, for the next opportunity to prove I was worthy of being loved. I pulled out my laptop and opened a browser. For a long moment, I just stared at the search bar. Then I typed, retirement communities in warm climates. I'd always wanted to live somewhere warm. Robert and I used to talk about it, about retiring to Florida or Arizona, somewhere we could walk outside in January without a coat. But after he died, it seemed frivolous, selfish. How could I move away when Julian might need me? But Julian didn't need me. He needed my money, and I was done providing it. I scrolled through pages of photos. Palm trees and swimming pools, communities with libraries and art classes and social events, places where people my age were starting over, finding joy, building new lives. I clicked on a listing in Sarasota, Florida. A small condo in a 55-plus community, 2 bedrooms, screened-in lanai, walking distance to the beach. The price was $185,000. I would have that money and more after both houses sold. My apartment here would bring in another $95,000. The house I'd bought for Julian would net me $290,000 after fees and the mortgage payoff, nearly $400,000 total. Enough to buy the Florida condo outright and have $200,000 left over. Enough to live comfortably on my Social Security without pinching every penny. Enough to take Eleanor to New Orleans like she'd invited me to do. Enough to stop saving for emergencies and start living for joy. I called the number on the listing. 3 weeks later, I stood in the empty house on Maple Street for the last time. The closing had been that morning. The new owners would get the keys tomorrow. Margaret had asked if I wanted to do a final walkthrough, and I'd said yes, though I wasn't sure why. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. Julian and Claire had taken everything, even the curtain rods. The rooms looked smaller, empty, less impressive. Just rooms. Just a house. I walked through each space slowly. The kitchen where I'd cooked that perfect meal for myself. The guest room where I'd slept for a week, where I'd started to find myself again. The living room where I'd sat on Christmas Day, heartbroken and alone. That moment felt like years ago instead of weeks. I was a different person now, stronger, clearer, less willing to accept crumbs and call it love. In the master bedroom, I noticed something on the closet floor. A photograph, face down. I picked it up. It was from Julian's high school graduation. He was wearing his cap and gown, grinning at the camera. I stood next to him, my arm around his shoulders, my face radiant with pride. Robert was on his other side, his hand on Julian's back. We looked happy. We looked like a family. I stared at that photograph for a long time. Then I slipped it into my purse, not because I wanted to remember Julian as he was now, because I wanted to remember the boy he'd been, the family we'd been, before grief and guilt and enabling had twisted everything into something unrecognizable. I walked out of the house and locked the door for the last time. Dropped the keys in the lockbox for the new owners. Got in my car, the same car I'd driven here on Christmas morning, a lifetime ago. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror once, just once. The house was already disappearing behind the trees, becoming just another building on just another street. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt light, untethered, free. My phone rang. Eleanor. "Did you do it?" she asked. "Did you say goodbye to the house?" I did. "How do you feel?" I thought about that as I merged onto the highway, heading back to my apartment to continue packing. In 3 days, I'd be in Florida. In a week, I'd be unpacking boxes in my new condo. In a month, Eleanor and I would be in New Orleans, eating beignets and listening to jazz. I feel, I said slowly, like I've been holding my breath for 3 years, and I'm finally exhaling. Eleanor laughed, that warm, knowing sound. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Vivian." The land of the living. Yes. That's exactly where I was going. I drove away from that house, from that chapter of my life, from the version of myself who believed love meant sacrifice without reciprocity. The sun was setting behind me, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I didn't look back again. The Christmas lights on my lanai swayed gently in the warm Florida breeze. It was 78 degrees on Christmas morning, and I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the palm trees. A year ago, I'd been driving through a snowstorm, my heart full of hope and my arms full of presents, heading toward the worst Christmas of my life. Today, I was wearing a sundress and sandals, and I'd never been happier. "Vivian, are you up?" Dorothy's voice called from inside. She let herself in through the sliding glass door. I'd given her a key 3 months ago, something I never would have done in my old life. "I brought cinnamon rolls from that bakery you love. Still warm." Dorothy was 73, a retired schoolteacher from Boston who'd moved to Sarasota 5 years ago. We'd met at a watercolor class I'd joined in February, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy being available for Julian's emergencies. She'd looked at my first attempt, a lopsided palm tree, and said, "Well, it's terrible, but you've got potential. We'd been inseparable ever since." "You're an angel," I said, following her inside. My condo was small but mine. Every piece of furniture chosen by me. For me. The walls were covered with my amateur paintings and photographs from the trips I'd taken this year: New Orleans with Eleanor in March, the Grand Canyon in June, a quilting retreat in Tennessee in September. I'd been more places in the past 11 months than I'd been in the previous 3 years combined. "Is Eleanor still coming?" Dorothy asked, arranging the rolls on a plate. "Her flight lands at 11. Margaret's picking her up from the airport." I checked my phone. "They should be here by 1. Margaret had visited twice since I'd moved, and each time she marveled at the change in me. "You look 10 years younger," she'd said on her last visit. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." What I was doing was living. Actually living, not just existing in the margins of someone else's life. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find James and Patricia from 2 doors down, holding a plate of cookies shaped like palm trees. "Merry Christmas," Patricia sang out. She was 68, from Chicago originally, with a laugh that could shake windows. "We're not staying. We know you've got people coming, but we wanted to drop these off." "Come in for a minute," I insisted. "Have some coffee." They did, and within 20 minutes, my small condo was full of warmth and laughter. Dorothy was telling a story about her grandson. Patricia was showing me pictures of her new boat. James was asking my advice about his watercolor technique. I'd become the unofficial teacher's assistant in our class, something that still amazed me. These people had known me for less than a year, but they knew me better than Julian had in his entire adult life. They knew I liked my coffee black, that I was terrified of pelicans, that I cried during sappy commercials. They knew these things because they paid attention, because they cared. After they left, I started preparing for dinner. Eleanor had requested my sweet potato pie, the same one I'd brought to Julian's house last Christmas, the one that had sat untouched in an empty kitchen. Today, it would be eaten and appreciated by people who actually wanted me here. I was rolling out the crust when my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but when I opened it, I recognized the area code. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you're doing well. Julian." I stared at the message for a long moment. Generic, impersonal, the kind of text you send to a distant acquaintance because social obligation demands it. "Hope you're doing well." Not "I miss you." Not "I'm sorry." Not even "I've been thinking about you." A year ago, this message would have broken me. I would have analyzed every word, searching for hidden meaning, for some sign that he wanted reconciliation. I would have spent hours crafting the perfect response, something warm but not too eager, loving but not needy. Today, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just nothing. I set the phone down and went back to my pie crust. I didn't respond. Eleanor arrived right on schedule, bursting through the door with her usual energy, Margaret following with luggage. We hugged like we hadn't seen each other in years instead of 2 months. "Look at you," Eleanor held me at arm's length. "Vivian, you're glowing. What's your secret?" "Vitamin D and boundaries," I said, and we both laughed. Dinner was perfect. My small dining table, the one I'd bought for myself, that fit exactly 4 people, was crowded with food. Sweet potato pie, honey-glazed ham, green beans, almondine, Parker House rolls. We ate and talked and laughed until my cheeks hurt. Dorothy told stories about her teaching days. Margaret shared horror stories from difficult clients. Eleanor caught everyone up on her grandchildren's latest antics. And I sat at the head of my own table, in my own home, surrounded by people who chose to be here. No one was checking their phone, planning their escape. No one was tolerating my presence while waiting for something better. They were here because they wanted to be, because they enjoyed my company, because I mattered to them. After dinner, we moved to the lanai with coffee and dessert. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, I could hear Christmas music from a neighbor's party. "I have an announcement," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "I'm going on a cruise in February, a quilting cruise to the Caribbean. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "Look at you, living large." "I can afford it," I said simply. And I could. My money was mine now. My time was mine. My life was mine. Margaret smiled. "You've come so far, Vivian. I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of me too," I said, and realized I meant it. Later, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up, I saw the text from Julian still on my phone. I picked it up, read it again, and this time I did respond. "Merry Christmas, Julian. I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking." Short, polite, honest. I didn't ask how he was, didn't offer information about my new life, didn't invite further conversation. I hit send and felt nothing. No guilt. No longing. No desperate hope that this would be the start of reconciliation. He'd made his choice last Christmas, and I'd made mine. I walked out to the lanai and sat in my favorite chair, looking up at the stars. They were brighter here than they'd been up north. Or maybe I was just paying attention for the first time in years. I thought about that woman who'd driven 6 hours through snow a year ago, her car full of presents, her heart full of hope. That woman who'd walked into an empty house and felt her world collapse. That woman who'd spent 3 years, no, maybe her whole life, waiting for someone else to make her feel valued. She'd needed that empty house. She'd needed that sticky note. She'd needed her heart broken so completely that the only option was to rebuild it stronger. The betrayal of one Christmas had been the gift of all my future Christmases. I pulled out my journal, another new hobby, and wrote. I had been waiting for a seat at their table. Now, I own the entire restaurant. I read the words twice, then closed the journal and smiled. Tomorrow, Dorothy and I were going kayaking. Next week, our watercolor class was starting a new project, Seascapes. In February, I'd be on a ship in the Caribbean, learning advanced quilting techniques from a master. In March, Eleanor and I were planning a trip to Savannah. My calendar was full, not with obligations and emergencies and other people's needs, with joy, with experiences, with life. A text came through. "Eleanor, thank you for today. Best Christmas I've had in years. Love you, sister." I typed back, "Love you too. See you in February for the cruise. Yes, I'm buying you a ticket. No arguments." Because I could. Because I had people in my life who would appreciate it, who would be grateful, who would celebrate with me instead of taking it for granted. The Christmas lights on my lanai blinked softly, reflecting in the sliding glass door. Inside, I could see my home, small, warm, wholly mine. On the wall was my favorite painting, the one I'd finished last month. A woman standing on a beach, her arms spread wide, her face turned toward the sun. I'd titled it Liberation. I raised my coffee cup to the stars, to the warm Florida night, to the future I'd built from the ashes of my worst Christmas. "Merry Christmas, Vivian," I said to myself. "Welcome home." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I truly was home. If you liked my story, you can support me by subscribing, liking, and sharing this story. Thank you in advance, and what would you do if you were in my place? I would love to hear your opinion, so please share it with me in the comments. I'm always curious about what you all think, and also, write me where you heard this story. For more stories like this, like the video, and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.